This is my first time in Michigan. Of course, first time in Ann Arbor. And of course, first time at Jewel Heart. But you know, when you come to new places, sometimes you don't know anybody, you don't know the place, you don't know how to get there, you get lost, all that stuff. But this has been a different experience. Even though it's my first time physically here, at least that I'm aware of, it feels like I've sort of, not that I've been here before, I don't have that actual feeling, but it feels very warm and very greeting, very, you know, kind of lovely sort of feelings and warmth I'm receiving from people. So that's wonderful, makes me feel happy. Even if that were not the case, I still feel happy. Because I'm kind of doing what my teacher has told me to do. And that makes me feel happy. And very fortunately, lucky for me, he didn't ask me to do something that wouldn't feel good. So he asked me a few years ago to do a little teaching, and that's kind of grown. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. And now those activities have grown. So I spend less and less time in Dharamsala, which is my home, more of the time on an airplane. So I'm getting very familiar with the inside of airplanes. And even on some of the long distance, you know, journeys, some of the stewardesses I'm getting to know. And they say, oh, hi, you're here again, you know. Making the jaunt from Delhi to Tokyo or Tokyo to LA or some of those things, you know. So I was asked to kind of talk a little bit about my journey, my life. And rather than just do a, you know, I was here, born here and this age, and that's boring, and you don't want to hear that. And, you know, I'm a little embarrassed to talk about those things. It's not that exciting. So what I thought I'd do is pick a few things that have impacted me in my life and just briefly speak about those. And then I'll tie it in with a little Dharma, okay? Because that's what we're all here for. We're all here to, you know, learn more of the Dharma, to practice more of the Dharma, and to be more happy, right? Is that what we're all here for? I think so. Most of us, anyway. Yeah. So we'll try to tie it into some of those things, too. I have no idea what I'm going to say. It's just kind of starting to flow, so bear with me. So don't hold it against me that I was born in Hollywood, please. I had nothing to do with that. My mother was on her way to a Halloween party with my father. And she said to my dad, you know what? I don't think I can go to this party. Better take me to a hospital. I'm going into labor. And the next morning on the 1st of November, I was born. And I was born in Hollywood. I was born in I was born in a hospital, and it's still there. I think it's still there. And the name of the hospital is Good Samaritan Hospital. So, I don't know, maybe someone knew that I was going to be a real bad boy, and they better get me born in Good Samaritan Hospital, get me more on the, you know, on the right side of the tracks. And I was born on All Saints' Day. So I don't know why those things happened, and I think they have nothing to do with anything, but anyway, that's when I was young. When I was young, I was plagued, really plagued, by 2 questions. And I think many other people have had similar experiences. Maybe now, maybe when you were young, maybe both. One question that just kept coming up, it was not something that I did intentionally, was, who am I? I mean, really, who am I? And of course, I didn't have any answers, but that question just kept coming up again and again. I think I remember I was maybe 6 or so when that started, in that sort of young age. And the other question that kept coming up for me is, what am I doing here? You know, what's my life really all about? These questions came up again and again. So much so that in high school I joined a philosophy club. So I thought, okay, well, where am I going to find the answer to these questions? I don't know. Join a philosophy club. So we had a really wonderful teacher from South America, from Chile, who had taught in university in Chile, but wasn't able to get his credential, at least yet, at that time. So he was teaching Spanish in our high school, and was really his interest, his area was philosophy. So he formed a philosophy club, and I joined that club. And the questions were addressed somewhat, but not satisfactorily for me. And then I went on to college and started out thinking I would be a doctor, not because of any family pressure. Nobody in my family was a doctor. I mean, my parents were happy that I was thinking about medicine, but they weren't pushing me, or they really had no influence. But when I was sick, when I was a kid, I was very sick. When I was 11 years old, I had an abscess in my brain, went into coma, and I nearly died. And that abscess ate away the bone in my skull. And then when I was 13, they decided to put a plastic plate in there to protect my brain. So that's my misplaced ushnish. It's actually a plastic plate. It's not infinite. It's something you can easily find the top of. An ushnish you can't find the top of, you know that. If you were to crawl up on top of the head of a Buddha and try to figure out the top of that ushnish, the more you look, the higher it would go, and you'd never find the top. This is not like that. The neurosurgeon that literally saved my life, operated on my brain, I think 4 times, and literally saved my life, I had great love for. He was my hero. And I just wanted to be like him. So from that age, I just wanted to go, be a doctor. That's what I wanted to do. And it was not an intellectual thing, it was deep in my heart. And then went to college, started pre-med, pre-med. I studied chemistry, and I studied math and biology and, a lot of that stuff for 2 years. I didn't like it. So I switched to philosophy. And I graduated from Berkeley in philosophy. And I looked at going into philosophy as a career, academic philosophy. And after much thought, I didn't think so. It wasn't fully answering the questions I had. Who am I? What am I doing here? So this feeling of being a doctor, again, came very strong, and I decided to go to medical school, became a doctor. And then I went to India for nearly a year. I was looking for something more. I didn't know what. And I spent some time in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, and India. Met some wonderful lamas, had some wonderful teachings, and, the hook was in. I didn't realize it then, but the hook was in, And then I worked a few years as an assistant professor in Seattle, at the University of Washington, in the School of Medicine. And I liked it. It was good. I had some good friends. I was very fortunate at that time in the mid-'80s. We had a wonderful lama that came from Dharamsala. And he was a career meditator. He spent his life in meditation. And somehow Alan Wallace was able to coax him to come to Seattle, at least the Seattle area. And he stayed 2 years. And I was the lucky guy that used to drive him around. So he was extremely precious, extremely kind, to someone that I have tremendous feeling of indebtedness and gratitude. He passed away about 5 or 6 years ago. But he was a very special one. A few of his teachings were made into books. There's one on Kala Chakra called, not The Wheel of Time. Is that Geshe Sopala's book, Wheel of Time? Anyway, it's something like that. It's a big blue book, Kala Chakra book. He was a Kala Chakra master. In Namgyal Monastery, which is in Dharamsala, which is the monastery for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is actually a Namgyal monk. Every year, they have cycles. They go through the different tantric practices through the year. So they do a couple weeks on Guhya Samaja and Yamantaka and Hiruka, and they do, I think, Dorji Purba, and they do Kala Chakra. And when they do the Kala Chakra for about 10 days, every day they recite the sadhana. Well, the sadhana. Sadhana is like for those of you that are not familiar, the sadhana is like the script to a play. Okay? Now the play is tantra, so it's kind of imaginary, but based on nonfiction, based on fact. Imaginary fact. And so they go through, they meditate and read and chant, all three things, the Kala Chakra sadhana. And there are several forms of the sadhana. Kala Chakra has what we call the body, speech, and the mind aspects of this play. Okay? And usually what we do is we recite the mind sadhana. So those of you that have maybe done Kala Chakra retreat, most likely you've done the mind sadhana. It takes you a couple hours to get through it. You do it either 2 or 4 times a day. Okay? So that's what they do on most of the days. On 3 of the days, they go through the whole sadhana, the body sadhana, the speech sadhana, the mind sadhana. The mind sadhana, I think there's about 32 deities. In the speech and the body, speech, and mind combined, there's 722. 722. And you have to do some mantra recitation for each deity. So that's very elaborate. It takes anywhere from 11 to 14 hours. And for 3 days, they recite this long version, the body, speech, and mind, Kala Chakra sadhana. And my teacher, Genlam Rinpa, was one of the very few lamas or people that were asked year in, year out to join the Namgyal monks to do this. Another great lama, who was also my lama, who passed a few years ago, was Kirti Tensab Rinpoche. And he also was a great Kala Chakra practitioner and also was invited by the Namgyal Monastery to participate in this about 10 days of reciting the Kala Chakra sadhanas, including the 3 days of the body, speech, and mind, the long one that used to take them 14 hours. So I was very lucky. I get to drive this Lama around, drive him around Seattle, drive him from Seattle down to the retreat center near Vancouver, Washington, a couple-hour drive, sometimes back. So I got to know him, and he had a profound effect on me, mostly in very positive, good ways, but some not so good ways. For a number of years, I thought I was a yogi. He was a yogi. He could live off of nothing. He ate, but he didn't have to eat. He would take breaths, but he almost didn't have to breathe. He was a real yogi. He had really had control over a lot of the internal elements and was quite a meditation master. So somehow I thought, since I'm his student, that I was like a yogi. So I didn't take care of my health. I didn't eat very well. I didn't sleep that much. And I did this for years. And as a result of that, my health really declined. And I'm doing a lot better now. I'm eating much better and doing much better. But I made the mistake to think that since I was his student, he was a yogi, well, therefore I'm a yogi, at least a yogi in training, but not. So when he finished teaching for 2 years in the state of Washington, he went back to his hermitage in the mountains above Dharamsala. And the people the group, the DFF group, the Dharma Friendship Foundation, a Dharma group in the state of Washington, they checked several times, I think 3 times, with the Indian consulate in San Francisco to make sure that Genlam Rinpa, his name was Genlam Rinpa, jumbled Tenzin, but everyone called him Genlam Rinpa. Make sure that all his papers were correct, because he's going back to India and he's a refugee, so he doesn't have a passport. He's stateless, as all of the Tibet, or almost all the Tibetans living outside of Tibet. Some of them now are getting some passports in America or Europe, but most of them don't have, who live in India. They don't have Indian citizenship. They don't have Indian passports. A few maybe have Nepali passports, but most of them, they don't. They're stateless. And so he had his yellow book, his IC, his identity card, and was told by the Indian consulate in San Francisco several times, all the papers are fine, he can return when he wants to India. So we went back. I went with him. And I was taking a leave of absence from the university for 6 months, thinking I'd be in Dharamsala for 6 months and go back. When we got to the airport in Delhi, they let me through. I have an American passport, American. And when Genla stepped up, they looked at all of his papers and they told him to go back. They weren't allowing him to come into India. Now, he had lived most of his life, since 1959-60 in India. And this was 1988, 1989. So he was living in India longer than any other country, longer than he was in Tibet. So I saw what was happening, and in those days I was rather bolden, nothing could stop me. I was a rebel from Berkeley days, and so that kind of blood sort of started boiling up in me, and I went back through the immigration. They were saying no, and they pulled their guns out, and I said, I'm staying with him, and I did. Now you can't do that so much, but in those days you could do it. You could kind of bluff your way, And so I stayed with him and found out that they weren't allowing him to go through, and this was, the flights are usually coming in about midnight, So it's early in the morning, and we're sitting in some chairs, and I'm waiting with him. And after a few hours, a man dressed in a uniform, white face, actually yellow face, comes and says to us, he was Singaporean, and he was an airline pilot for Singapore Airlines. And we'd come on Singapore Airlines. And he told me, and told us, in English, of course, speaks perfect English, that the Indian authorities are sending Genlam Rinpa back to Singapore on the next flight, which will be in a few hours, maybe, 6 hours or something. And he just wanted to inform us of that. So I tried everything I could do. There were a few very funky phones. Do you know funky phones in the third developing world? This was when India was a little bit, now it's coming up, but these were funky phones. And they hardly worked, and I tried for hours, but finally I could get a line, and then everybody was sleeping, so I had to wait a few more hours. And finally got a hold of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's ambassador and his office, the representative in Delhi. And so they came in the morning, and I was able to convince the authorities that, Genlam Rinpa, we were told many times by your consulate, Indian consulate in San Francisco, papers are fine, so we should be okay here. What's the problem? And finally, I was able to negotiate with them, and they gave us 24 hours to go around Delhi, try to get the appropriate, they told us what we needed, to which offices and get the stamps. And if we could do it, he could stay. If we couldn't, then he'd have to be sent back. He wasn't officially those 24 hours in India, but they allowed us to go around to try to get the official stamps for that. So we went around, and we had a car from the Bureau, one of the few cars in the Tibetan community in those days, an old, white ambassador. And they took us around, and we went to all the offices. Some were, at lunch we had to wait, and got everything done. We got everything done except one stamp, and it was 5 o'clock. And you know that offices in India that are supposed to close at 5, they close at 4. Nothing happens after 4. If you're lucky, after 4. Sometimes after 2, right? Or sometimes they're just closed. You don't know why. So we went in, and it was 5 o'clock. And I was sure, we're not going to make this. We went in, and Genla says, let's go. So we went, and we walk into the office, and everybody's the door's open, but nobody's there. We saw a woman in the back office, and she said, what are you doing here? So I tried to briefly explain, and she didn't say no. I showed her the papers. She looked at everything, asked a few questions, pulled out the stamp from her drawer, and went boom. Gave us the last stamp we needed. So we had it. Genla could stay. So I don't know why I'm telling you this story, but so he went back to his hermitage above Dharamsala, and then in 1993, about 4 or 5 years later, he moved to Gangtok and continued his lifelong meditation, and then became sick with stomach cancer and died about 5, 6 years ago. And when he passed, I was with him. He was in his home in Gangtok, over the hill from Gangtok in Chanmari on the backside in Sikkim. And he had a little home there, little house. And when his heart stopped and his breathing stopped, he looked very fresh. And we thought, he doesn't look dead. Even though his heart has stopped and he's not breathing, doesn't look dead. And so there's this tradition that some of you are aware of called tuktam, where actually death hasn't occurred, even though the heart and the breathing have stopped. Death hasn't occurred. So the body stays fresh. And in fact, the person is still in meditation. And that's what turned out to be happening with Genlam Rinpa. For 5 days, he stayed fresh. Limbs were supple. No bad smell. In fact, it was almost this very, very light or faint smell of roses or flowers or perfume. Everybody around there was very happy, very, very happy. And yet our Lama was dying. Everybody was happy. It's amazing. This went on for 5 days, after which copious amounts of white and red fluids came out of the nostrils. We filled a little bowl, about a third of the way up, a bowl that would sit here, like in my hand, a number of ounces. Not as much as this full glass of water, but maybe half of it. And then very quickly, over a few hours, the skin started to change. There started to be a foul odor. And it was very obvious. Big blisters came, black and blue came all over the body. And it changed just almost like in front of our eyes. It took a few hours. Richard Davidson, with a group, he's sort of heading it, is studying this phenomenon of tuktam. Tuktam is a Tibetan word. Tuk means the mind. Kusum tuk is the honorific form of mind or consciousness. And Dham has many meanings, at least 7, but in this context means sacred. So literally sacred mind or sacred consciousness. And what is sacred consciousness? Well, there are different levels of subtlety of our consciousness. We kind of know that. Like, how many people here have ever been a little bit intuitive? I'm not asking if you're psychic, but you've just been intuitive about something, ever. Raise your hand. Pretty much everybody, or most people, almost everybody. You just have a feeling Yeah? It's not in words, it's a feeling. You may be right, sometimes you're wrong, yeah? But you have a feeling, a strong feeling that, oh, something's going to happen or about something in the future. So that's a more subtle mind because it's not thinking. Okay? It's still awake. You're not sleeping. But it's more subtle than a thinking mind. More subtle yet is going to sleep when we start dreaming. So dreaming is very active, isn't it? I mean, our senses are shut down. We're not actually seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, or touching when we're dreaming. But it's like we are, isn't it? Yeah? It's like we can see things. It's like we can hear things, smell, taste, touch things. So the senses aren't actually operating, but something is imitating our senses during dream. It's very active. But yet it's a more subtle state than being awake. Okay? Then when we go into deep sleep, and usually we don't know we're in deep sleep. Okay? Very rare for someone to remember. First to know when we're in deep sleep, oh, I'm in deep sleep. And then to remember it later. It's very rare. But there are people who lucid dream. Some of you guys lucid dream. When you're dreaming, you know you're dreaming. Okay, some people can do that, lucid dreams. But when you're in deep sleep, and it's almost like a blackness, it's very difficult to know you're in deep sleep when you're in deep sleep, and also to remember it later. Very difficult. There are meditators that can do that, but it's not easy to do. It's a deeper level of consciousness or mind, deep sleep. And then we have even deeper levels that are not only non-conceptual, but they're also what we call non-dual. There's no sense of a me, or an object, what I'm looking at, or hearing, or even thinking about. None of that's going on. Okay? So no subject, no object. In that sense, non-dual. We're just sort of in the moment, so to speak. Okay? Very subtle minds. And then different visions occur, having to do with different colors, like white and red and black. And then we go into this most deep state, which we call wuser. And literally it means luminosity. Often we use, in English, we say clear light. It's not talking about a clear light bulb. Okay, not anything out there we're looking at. It's the experience of clear light, or the experience of luminosity. We are luminosity. Okay? And so that's what Tukdam refers to, is that state, that most subtle state, which happens naturally at death to all of us. Usually we don't remember it, assuming you have some, at least you're open to the possibility of rebirth. Next time, usually you don't remember it. Okay? Some people do. And that state can be induced or can be brought about through meditation. Okay? You know, some of you have heard the Dalai Lama who has said that he dies 7 times a day. Anybody heard that? He says that sometimes. Every day I die 7 times. What he means is he's accessing this most subtle mind of clear light, which is the same as that most subtle mind that manifests naturally at the time of death. So he goes through these 8 stages, okay, just like we do when we die. Now, he says he does that 7 times a day. We know he abides in that state all the time, but he's just teaching us, okay, by saying, I die 7 times a day. Okay, so that's Tukdam.